A single touch can ignite something forbidden on the Texas frontier. But what happens when a choice between fear and connection changes everything? Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The sun beat down mercilessly on the parched Texas plains as Sarah Montgomery wiped the sweat from her brow. The summer of 1875 had brought relentless heat to the frontier settlement of White Rock, testing the resolve of even the most hardened settlers. Sarah adjusted her bonnet and continued hanging laundry, the white sheets snapping in the hot breeze that offered little relief from the oppressive heat. At 22, Sarah had already endured more hardship than most. After losing her parents to typhoid 2 years prior, she had taken over the small trading post they'd established at the edge of the settlement. It was a modest living, but it was hers, and she took pride in maintaining her independence in a land where women were expected to marry or move back east. "Miss Montgomery," a voice called from the dusty road. Thomas Jenkins, the town's young deputy, approached on horseback, his badge glinting in the sunlight. "Got a moment to spare?" Sarah nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "What can I help you with, deputy?" "Sheriff's called a town meeting for tomorrow morning. Wanted to make sure you knew." Thomas shifted in his saddle. "It's about the Comanche. There's been some trouble north of here." A familiar knot formed in Sarah's stomach. Relations with the native tribes had always been tense, particularly with the Comanche, whose warrior tradition had earned them a fearsome reputation. "What kind of trouble?" she asked, her voice steady despite her concern. Thomas shook his head. "Raiding party hit a homestead about 20 miles north. Family wasn't harmed, but they lost their livestock." He lowered his voice. "Army's sending a patrol through, and they'll be stopping here for supplies." Sarah nodded. "I'll have what they need." After Thomas rode off, Sarah returned to her chores, her mind troubled. The trading post her parents had built had always operated on a principle of fairness with everyone, settlers and natives alike. Her father had even learned enough Comanche to trade with them when bands passed through, earning a rare measure of respect. As evening approached, Sarah closed the trading post and retreated to her small cabin behind the store. After a simple dinner, she sat on her porch, watching as the blazing sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The beauty of the frontier could still take her breath away. The sound of a horse approaching pulled her from her reverie. Visitors at this hour were unusual, and Sarah reached for the rifle she kept by the door, a necessary precaution for a woman living alone on the frontier. The rider emerged from the growing darkness, and Sarah tensed. He wasn't a settler or a soldier. Even in the fading light, she could see he was Comanche by his bearing and dress, though he wore a curious mix of native and white man's clothing. He rode with the easy confidence of someone born to the saddle, but there was caution in how he approached, his hands visible. Sarah kept her rifle ready but not raised. The rider stopped at a respectful distance, then slowly dismounted. "I seek trade," he said in accented but clear English, "and shelter for the night." Sarah studied him in the dim light. He was tall, with the muscular build of a warrior, his long black hair tied back. A scar ran along his left cheekbone, and his dark eyes watched her warily. "The trading post is closed until morning," Sarah replied, her voice firm despite the rapid beating of her heart. "I cannot wait until morning," he said. "I am not welcome in daylight." Understanding dawned. This man was taking a considerable risk coming to a white settlement alone, especially with tensions rising. Something in his demeanor, a quiet dignity despite his obvious caution, reminded Sarah of her father's principles. "What's your name?" she asked, still not lowering her rifle. "White settlers call me Swift Hawk," he answered. "My people once called me Tabe." "Once?" Sarah couldn't help asking. A shadow crossed his face. "I am no longer with my band. I travel alone." An exiled Comanche warrior, Sarah thought. The situation grew more complicated by the moment, yet something compelled her to hear him out. "What do you seek to trade?" Swift Hawk reached slowly into his saddlebag and produced several neatly prepared beaver pelts. These for ammunition and coffee. Sarah knew such a trade would likely earn her the disapproval of most in town, particularly with the current tensions. But the trading post had been built on fair commerce with all who came in peace. "Come inside," she finally said, lowering her rifle slightly. "But understand, any trouble, and this conversation ends. Swifthawk nodded solemnly. I bring no trouble to your door, Miss Montgomery, Sarah Montgomery. As they entered the trading post, the lamplight revealed more details of her unusual customer. His face showed the weathering of a man who lived outdoors, but his eyes held an intelligence and wariness that spoke of experiences beyond his years, which she guessed to be near 30. The scar on his cheekbone was joined by others on his arms, the marks of a warrior's life. Sarah assessed the pelts he offered. They were expertly prepared, worth more than the ammunition and coffee he requested. These are fine pelts, she acknowledged. Worth more than what you're asking. Swifthawk's expression remained impassive. I ask fair trade, not charity. Sarah nodded, respecting his pride. As she measured coffee beans into a small sack, her curiosity got the better of her. Why do you travel alone? His eyes met hers, searching for something, perhaps the true intent behind her question. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him, for he answered, I disagreed with my war chief's methods. I believed peace with the white settlers was possible. His voice held no self-pity, only statement of fact. For this I was cast out. Sarah handed him the coffee and ammunition. That sounds like a story worth hearing. For the first time, something like surprise flickered in Swifthawk's eyes. Few white settlers wish to hear Comanche stories. I'm not most settlers, Sarah replied simply. As Swifthawk prepared to leave, he paused at the door. May I return to trade again? Sarah knew she should say no. With tensions rising and the army arriving soon, associating with a lone Comanche warrior could bring unwelcome attention. Yet the principles her parents had instilled in her wouldn't allow her to turn away someone seeking honest trade. Come at dusk, she said, and approach from the west, away from town. Swifthawk nodded, understanding the risk she was taking. As he mounted his horse, he looked back at her. Thank you, Sarah Montgomery. The way he said her name, carefully, as though testing the feel of it on his tongue, sent an unexpected shiver through her. As she watched him ride away into the darkness, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just taken an irrevocable turn. The town meeting the following morning was exactly as Sarah had anticipated. Tense, fearful, and punctuated by calls for retribution against the Comanche. Sheriff Miller, a reasonable man who had seen enough frontier violence to last several lifetimes, tried to calm the more aggressive voices. The Army Patrol will be here tomorrow, he explained to the assembled townspeople in White Rock's small church. Captain Reynolds assures me they'll investigate the raids thoroughly. Investigation won't bring back stolen cattle, argued Frank Thornton, one of the larger ranchers in the area. Those savages only understand one language, force. Sarah winced at the dehumanizing language but kept silent. Her views on peaceful coexistence with the native tribes were well known and not particularly popular, especially in times of tension. Miss Montgomery, Thornton turned to her suddenly, your trading post sits at the edge of town. Have you noticed any suspicious activity? Any Indians lurking about? All eyes turned to her. Sarah felt a moment of panic, thinking of Swifthawk's visit the previous night. But she had done nothing wrong. Trading wasn't illegal, even with natives. No, Mr. Thornton, she answered steadily. I've seen no one suspicious. It wasn't precisely a lie. There had been nothing suspicious about Swifthawk's behavior. He had come to trade honestly, nothing more. After the meeting, Sarah hurried back to her trading post to prepare for the Army Patrol's arrival. The day passed quickly with regular customers and preparations, but her mind kept returning to the Comanche warrior and his story. Cast out for advocating peace, it seemed a cruel irony. As dusk approached, Sarah found herself watching the western horizon, wondering if Swifthawk would return as discussed. Part of her hoped he wouldn't. It would certainly be safer for them both. Yet another part, a part she couldn't quite explain, hoped to see him again. The soft nickering of a horse alerted her. Swifthawk materialized from the growing darkness, approaching cautiously from the west as instructed. Sarah stepped onto her porch, noting how he constantly scanned their surroundings, alert to danger. You came back, she said simply. I said I would. His expression remained serious, but something in his eyes had softened slightly. You took risk to trade with me. I honor that. Sarah gestured toward the back of the trading post. Come. We shouldn't be seen from the road. In the small living area behind the store, Sarah lit a lamp, keeping the flame low. Swifthawk remained standing, seemingly uncomfortable within the confines of the wooden walls. "Please sit," Sarah offered, indicating a chair at her small table. After a moment's hesitation, he complied, though his posture remained alert. Sarah placed a cup of coffee before him, remembering he had traded for it the night before. "Army patrol arrives tomorrow," she informed him, feeling he should know. "There's talk of increased patrols after the raid north of here." Swifthawk's face darkened. "It was not my band, but I know of it. Young warriors, eager to prove themselves." He shook his head. "They do not understand that such actions bring only more suffering. Is that why you were cast out? For opposing such raids?" He studied her for a long moment before answering. "Partly. I had seen too much death, Comanche and white alike. I spoke against War Chief Stonebear's plans for more raids." His hands tightened around the coffee cup. "I had also learned too much of the white man's ways during time spent with traders. Some said I had lost my Comanche heart. But you still dress as Comanche, speak as Comanche," Sarah observed. "I am Comanche," he said firmly. "But I see a future where our children do not die in endless war. For this vision, I am called traitor." Sarah was struck by the depth of his conviction and the cost he had paid for it. "Where do you go now? What future can there be for a lone warrior?" Swifthawk's gaze met hers, and the intensity she found there made her breath catch. "I do not know. Perhaps there is no future for me, but I must try to find a path between worlds." "A difficult path," Sarah murmured. "Yes." His eyes never left hers. "But perhaps not one I walk entirely alone." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken meaning. Sarah found herself noticing details she'd overlooked before: the intelligence in his dark eyes, the strength in his hands, the proud set of his shoulders even in exile. Swifthawk suddenly tensed, head turning toward the window. "Riders coming." Sarah extinguished the lamp immediately. "How many?" "2, moving slowly." "Not army." Moving to the window, Sarah peered out into the darkness. She recognized the silhouettes of Thomas Jenkins and another man from town, patrolling the outskirts. "It's the deputy and one of the townsmen," she whispered. "They shouldn't come this way, but if they do—" Swifthawk was already moving toward the back door. "I will go." "Wait," Sarah said, making a quick decision. "Take some supplies." She hurriedly gathered dried beef, more coffee, and a small bag of flour. "Where can I find you if I need to warn you about the army patrols?" He hesitated. "There is a stand of cottonwoods by the creek 2 miles west. I camp there." As he prepared to slip away, Swifthawk paused. "Why do you help me, Sarah Montgomery?" It was a question Sarah had been asking herself. "My father believed in treating all people with respect, regardless of where they came from. He taught me that understanding between peoples begins with individuals who are willing to listen." Swifthawk studied her face in the dim light from the stars outside. "Your father was wise." He moved closer, his presence both commanding and gentle. "What if I touch you?" he asked suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. The unexpected question sent Sarah's heart racing. The propriety she'd been raised with warred with something deeper, more instinctual. Her sharp intake of breath was answer enough. With deliberate slowness, Swifthawk reached out, his fingers lightly brushing a strand of hair from her face. The simple contact sent a current through her that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with a connection she couldn't explain. "I will return," he promised, his voice low and resonant in the darkness. Then he was gone, slipping into the night like a shadow. Sarah stood frozen, her cheek still tingling from his touch, as the deputies' voices grew louder outside. She quickly composed herself and went to meet them, praying her flushed cheeks wouldn't betray her in the darkness. "Evening, Miss Montgomery," Deputy Jenkins called. "Just checking the outlying properties, all quiet here." "Yes, Deputy," Sarah replied, amazed at how steady her voice sounded when her heart was pounding so fiercely. Nothing out of the ordinary. As they rode off, Sarah returned inside, her mind in turmoil. What was she doing, harboring an exiled Comanche warrior? Feeling this inexplicable pull toward him. It was madness by any measure of frontier society. Yet as she prepared for bed, Sarah couldn't regret her actions. In Swifthawk, she had glimpsed a kindred spirit, someone caught between worlds, seeking a path forward that honored the best of both. and that single gentle touch had awakened something in her that she hadn't known was sleeping. Outside, a coyote called into the night, its lonely cry echoing across the plains. Sarah wondered if Swift-Hawk heard it too, under his canopy of cottonwood leaves by the creek. For the first time in years, she didn't feel quite so alone on the frontier. The Army patrol arrived the following afternoon. 6 dusty soldiers led by Captain Reynolds, a career military man with a weathered face and calculating eyes. Sarah provided the supplies they requested, maintaining a professional demeanor while straining to hear any information about their plans. "We'll be patrolling the area for at least a week," Captain Reynolds informed her as his men loaded supplies. "Any Comanche sightings should be reported immediately." "Of course, Captain," Sarah replied, her face betraying nothing of her inner turmoil. "Though it's been peaceful here." Reynolds studied her with narrowed eyes. "Miss Montgomery, I understand your father was known for trading with Indians." Sarah's spine stiffened. "My father believed in fair commerce with all who came in peace." "Yes, admirable in peaceful times," Reynolds said, his tone suggesting it was anything but admirable now. "But these aren't peaceful times. The Comanche understand force, not commerce. Remember that if any approach you." After the patrol departed, Sarah went about her day with a growing sense of dread. The soldier's presence complicated everything, putting Swift-Hawk in even greater danger. She needed to warn him, but visiting his camp in daylight would be too risky. As evening approached, Sarah made a decision. Closing the trading post early, she told her neighbors she was feeling unwell and retired to her cabin. Once darkness fell, she changed into her darkest dress, pulled a shawl over her head, and slipped out the back door with a small bundle of supplies. The night was cooler than previous ones, with clouds obscuring the moon and stars. Sarah followed the creek west, moving as quietly as her city-bred upbringing allowed. Every rustle in the brush made her heart race, but she pressed on, driven by an urgency she couldn't fully explain. The stand of cottonwoods loomed ahead, their silhouettes black against the night sky. Sarah hesitated at the edge of the small grove, suddenly uncertain. "Swift-Hawk?" she called softly, peering into the darkness. A shadow detached itself from the trees, and suddenly he was before her, materializing like a spirit from the darkness. His expression showed surprise mixed with concern. "Sarah Montgomery, you should not be here." His eyes scanned the surroundings. "It is dangerous. I had to warn you," she said urgently. "The Army patrol, they're staying at least a week, searching specifically for Comanche." Swift-Hawk's face grew solemn. "You risked much to tell me this. I couldn't let you ride into danger unknowing," Sarah replied, realizing as she spoke how true it was. In the short time since they'd met, this man's safety had become important to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. He gestured toward a small camp hidden among the trees. A tiny fire, carefully shielded to prevent its light from being seen, provided minimal warmth and illumination. Sarah followed him, taking in the sparse but meticulously organized campsite that clearly belonged to a man accustomed to moving quickly. "You should return soon," Swift-Hawk said as they sat by the fire. "If you are discovered missing—" "Not yet," Sarah interrupted. "First, tell me where you'll go. The patrol is concentrating on the north and east. Perhaps south would be safer?" Swift-Hawk studied her face in the firelight. "Why does my safety concern you so deeply, Sarah Montgomery?" The direct question caught her off guard. Why indeed? This man was practically a stranger, from a culture different from her own, in circumstances that made any connection between them dangerous at best. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "Perhaps because you stand for something I've always believed in, that there must be a way for different peoples to coexist without bloodshed." She paused, gathering courage. "Or perhaps because when you touched me, I felt something I've never felt before." The admission hung in the air between them, bold and undeniable. Swift-Hawk's expression softened, the stoic warrior giving way to something more vulnerable. "I felt it also," he said quietly. "A connection that should not be, yet is." He moved closer, his presence enveloping her like a physical force. "What if I touch you again?" he asked, echoing his question from the night before. Sarah's breath quickened. "I think we both know the answer to that." With deliberate gentleness, Swift-Hawk reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. Sarah closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. When she opened them again, His face was inches from hers, his dark eyes reflecting the small flames of the fire. "This path brings danger," he whispered. "I know," she replied, yet made no move to pull away. The kiss, when it came, was tentative at first, a question rather than a demand. Sarah answered by leaning into him, her hands finding the solid warmth of his shoulders. The world around them seemed to fade as the kiss deepened, becoming something neither had expected to find on the Texas frontier. When they finally parted, Sarah's heart was racing, her thoughts scattered like leaves in a storm. Swifthawk looked equally affected, his customary composure replaced by an intensity that made her breath catch. "I have known battle," he said softly, "faced death many times, yet nothing has frightened me as much as what I feel for you." Sarah understood completely. What was growing between them defied every boundary of the world they inhabited, a world where such connections were not merely discouraged, but potentially deadly. A distant sound broke the moment, horses' hooves approaching along the creek. Swifthawk was immediately alert. "Patrol," he whispered, extinguishing the fire with a handful of dirt. Sarah's blood ran cold. "How did they know to come here?" "Perhaps they didn't," he replied, gathering his few possessions with practiced efficiency. "Perhaps it is routine patrol. Either way, you cannot be found here." "And you can't be caught," Sarah insisted. "Where will you go?" Swifthawk hesitated only briefly. "There is a canyon to the south where my people sometimes camped in winter. I will go there." His eyes met hers in the darkness. "In 7 days, if you can, come to the old mission ruins south of town. I will wait for you there at dusk." The sound of horses grew louder. Swifthawk pulled Sarah to her feet, his grip firm but gentle. "Go now, follow the creek back, stay in the water to hide your tracks." Sarah clutched his arm. "Promise me you'll be careful." Instead of answering, he pulled her to him for one more fierce, brief kiss. "Go," he urged as they separated. Heart pounding, Sarah slipped into the shallow creek, the cold water soaking her dress. She moved as quickly as she dared, keeping to the shadows, praying the patrol wouldn't spot her. Behind her, she heard Swifthawk's horse moving in the opposite direction, drawing attention away from her retreat. The journey back seemed endless, every sound magnified by fear. When she finally reached her cabin, Sarah was soaked, exhausted, and terrified, not just for herself but for the warrior who had somehow claimed a piece of her heart in mere days. Inside, she changed quickly, hiding her wet clothes and trying to calm her racing thoughts. The night's events replayed in her mind. The warning, the conversation by the fire, the kiss that had changed everything, and the frantic separation. Sarah touched her lips, still feeling the imprint of his. She had always prided herself on being practical and level-headed, qualities necessary for a woman alone on the frontier. Yet here she was, entangled in a connection that defied all practicality, all social boundaries. As she finally lay in bed, listening for any sign that the patrol had followed her, Sarah wondered what her parents would think of her actions. Her father, with his belief in fair treatment for all, might have understood the principle behind helping Swifthawk. But this wasn't just about principles anymore. It was about emotions neither of them had sought but couldn't deny. Sleep eluded her as questions circled endlessly. Would Swifthawk reach the canyon safely? Would the Army Patrol expand their search area? And most troubling of all, was there any future possible for a white trader's daughter and an exiled Comanche warrior in a land torn by conflict? No answers came as dawn approached, bringing with it the weight of 7 days waiting and wondering. The week that followed tested Sarah's composure like nothing before. She maintained her routine at the trading post, smiled at customers, and exchanged pleasantries with townsfolk, all while her thoughts remained with Swifthawk. Every time the Army Patrol passed through town, her heart would race, dreading news of a Comanche warrior captured or killed. Captain Reynolds made a point of stopping by the trading post regularly, his questions seemingly casual but his eyes watchful. Sarah answered everything truthfully. Technically, no, she hadn't seen any Comanche near the trading post since they arrived, while concealing the deeper truth of her heart. By the 6th day, rumors spread that the patrol had encountered no hostile natives and would soon move on to other areas. Sarah allowed herself to hope, counting the hours until she could ride to the mission ruins. On the morning of the 7th day, Thomas Jenkins arrived at the trading post, his expression grave. "Miss Montgomery," he greeted her, removing his hat. "Sheriff asks if you'd come to his office. There's a situation he'd like your help with." Sarah's stomach nodded. "What kind of situation?" Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "Army patrol caught a Comanche scout yesterday. Captain Reynolds is questioning him, but they're getting nowhere. Sheriff thought, given your father's history with the tribes." Sarah struggled to maintain her composure. "He wants me to translate? I'm afraid my father's knowledge of the language died with him. I know only a few words. Still, the sheriff thought you might help somehow. The prisoner refuses to speak English, though Captain thinks he understands it. A prisoner who understood English, but refused to speak it." Sarah's heart raced. It could be any Comanche warrior, she told herself, but deep down, she knew. "I'll come right away," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. The sheriff's office was crowded when they arrived. Sheriff Miller nodded to Sarah, while Captain Reynolds looked less pleased by her presence. In the cell at the back sat a figure Sarah recognized immediately, though she fought to keep any recognition from her face. Swift Hawk sat straight-backed on the simple cot, his hands bound before him. His face bore a fresh bruise, but his expression remained proud and unbroken. His eyes flickered to Sarah for just an instant, then away, giving no sign that he knew her. "Miss Montgomery," Sheriff Miller said, "appreciate you coming. Captain Reynolds captured this fellow near the South Canyon yesterday. He matches descriptions of a Comanche who's been seen around these parts, possibly a scout for raiding parties." "What makes you think that?" Sarah asked carefully. "He was watching the town through a spyglass," Reynolds interjected. "A glass stolen from a homestead that was raided last month, no doubt." Sarah's mind raced. Swift Hawk had been waiting for her, watching for her approach to the ruins. She had to tread very carefully now. "What do you need from me, Sheriff?" "Just to try talking to him, see if you can get anything. Captain here thinks he understands English well enough." Sarah approached the cell, feeling every eye in the room on her. Swift Hawk looked up, his face impassive, but she could see the warning in his eyes. Whatever happened, they could not reveal their connection. "I'm Sarah Montgomery," she began formally. "Do you understand me?" Swift Hawk regarded her silently, his expression unreadable to others but full of meaning to her. "Yes," his eyes said. "Follow my lead." Sarah turned to the sheriff. "May I ask what you want to know from him? Where his band is camped, whether they're planning more raids?" Sheriff Miller listed off the standard questions. Sarah nodded and turned back to Swift Hawk. "The sheriff wants to know about your band, where they are camped." Swift Hawk remained silent, his gaze steady. "Look," Captain Reynolds said impatiently, "we know he's not with any band. The other Comanche we've questioned say he's an exile, cast out for being too friendly with whites. The irony would be amusing if he wasn't still scouting for attacks." Sarah's breath caught. Reynolds had unknowingly provided the perfect opening. "Is that true?" she asked Swift Hawk. "Are you exiled from your people?" For the first time, Swift Hawk spoke, his voice low and dignified. "I am Tabe, once called Swift Hawk by traders. I walk alone." "Why were you exiled?" Sarah pressed, building on what she already knew. Swift Hawk's eyes held hers. "I spoke against raids on white settlements. I said peace was possible." His gaze swept over the assembled men. "For this, my people called me traitor." Sheriff Miller looked surprised. "If that's true, why were you watching the town?" Swift Hawk hesitated. Sarah knew the real answer. He had been watching for her, would doom them both. "I watch all who pass," Swift Hawk replied carefully. "Army, settlers, traders, I harm none. I trade for what I need." "Trade?" Reynolds scoffed. "With whom?" Sarah's heart hammered. This was the dangerous moment. "With those who will trade fairly," Swift Hawk answered, his eyes never leaving Sarah's, as Sarah Montgomery's father did before his death. The room went silent. All eyes turned to Sarah. "Did you trade with this man, Miss Montgomery?" Sheriff Miller asked quietly. Sarah took a deep breath. "Yes," she admitted. "He came to the trading post twice. He offered fair trade, pelts for basic supplies. Nothing that could be used for raids or attacks." "And you didn't report this?" Reynolds demanded, his face reddening. "There's no law against trading with peaceful Indians," Sarah replied, drawing on all her courage. "My father established the trading post on that principle. This man has done nothing wrong that I can see. Except being born Comanche. Sheriff Miller studied her face, then Swift Hawk's. Something in his experienced eyes suggested he might be seeing more than Sarah wanted him to. "Captain," the sheriff said finally, "I don't believe this man is a threat to this town. He's been in the area for weeks, according to Miss Montgomery, and we've had no trouble here." "You're taking the word of a woman and a savage over mine?" Reynolds asked incredulously. "I'm using my judgment," Miller replied firmly. "This is still my jurisdiction, Captain. Unless you have evidence of a crime, I suggest you release this man with a warning to stay clear of Army patrols." The tension in the room was palpable as Reynolds and Miller stared each other down. Finally, Reynolds nodded curtly. "Fine. Release him. But if there's any trouble, Sheriff, it's on your head." He turned to Sarah. "And yours, Miss Montgomery." After the captain stormed out, Sheriff Miller unlocked the cell. "You're free to go," he told Swift Hawk. "But I suggest you move on from this area. The Army won't always be so easily persuaded." Swift Hawk stood, his dignity intact despite his bonds, which the sheriff now removed. "I understand," he said simply. As Swift Hawk collected his few possessions, Sheriff Miller drew Sarah aside. "Miss Montgomery, a word of advice. Whatever is between you and this man, and don't bother denying it. I've seen enough in my years to recognize when two people share something. It can't end well in these times, in this place." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Sometimes, Sheriff, we don't choose where our hearts lead us." Miller nodded sadly. "That's true enough. Just be careful. Very careful." Outside the sheriff's office, Sarah and Swift Hawk walked side by side toward the trading post, maintaining a respectful distance that revealed nothing of their true feelings. Words were unnecessary between them. Both understood the gravity of what had just happened and what might come next. At the trading post, Sarah provided Swift Hawk with supplies while he prepared his horse. Their conversation, conducted in low voices, was brief and heavy with unspoken emotion. "You must leave this place," Sarah said, her voice breaking slightly. "Captain Reynolds won't give up so easily." Swift Hawk nodded. "I know, but I cannot ask you to leave your home, your life." "My home is where I make it," Sarah replied, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "My parents built this trading post to bridge worlds, not divide them. Perhaps that work can continue elsewhere." Swift Hawk studied her face. "You would leave everything you know? For an uncertain future?" "For a future with possibility," she corrected. "There's a trading settlement near the New Mexico territory border, San Lorenzo. My father had friends there, people who shared his views on peaceful coexistence." Understanding dawned in Swift Hawk's eyes. "You have thought about this." "Every day since we met," Sarah admitted. "I'll need 3 days to settle affairs here. Then I can meet you at Cedar Creek Crossing." Swift Hawk took her hand, the gesture hidden from any watching eyes by their bodies and the gathering dusk. "What if I touch you?" he asked, the question now laden with new meaning. "A future together, a life bridging 2 worlds. Then we find our path together," Sarah answered, her breath catching as his fingers intertwined with hers. 3 days later, Sarah Montgomery left White Rock before dawn, leaving behind a letter explaining her decision to sell the trading post and seek opportunities further west. Speculation would run rampant, but by then, she would be beyond its reach. At Cedar Creek Crossing, Swift Hawk waited, as promised. When their eyes met across the distance, both knew there would be challenges ahead: prejudice, hardship, and the uncertainties of a frontier in transition. But they would face them together, pioneers of a different sort of frontier, the space between cultures where understanding might grow. "Ready?" Swift Hawk asked, as Sarah guided her horse alongside his. Sarah nodded, looking forward rather than back. "Ready?" As they rode west together toward San Lorenzo and the promise of a new beginning, the Texas sun cast their shadows side by side across the rolling plains, 2 figures from different worlds, finding their way forward as one.